It's been around 2 weeks since I stumbled upon the ugly truth. My wife, Louise, cheated on me with her ex. She claims she did it because she felt insecure about my old relationship with Fatima, which to me is the lamest excuse I've ever heard. Yet, somehow, people around us seem to side with her and are pushing me to let it go and forgive her. I need an opinion from someone who's not tangled up in this mess. I'll give some background. It might be a bit lengthy, but I think it's worth sharing. Fatima and I go way back, to when we were just 3 years old. Her mom worked as a nanny, looking after a bunch of kids, including me. We were so inseparable that our mothers became friends and eventually arranged for us to attend the same school. We spent practically every moment of our childhood together until I was 13. Back then, people even called us the Siamese twins. Sure, we bickered a lot, but we always stuck together, which led to us being a bit isolated from other kids. But that didn't bother us much. Having each other was all that mattered. When we turned 11, our families started to worry about how close we were, saying it was unhealthy and that we needed to branch out and make other friends. But their efforts to separate us only made us realize how deeply we cared for each other, that it was more than just a friendship. Our families, though, were very conservative, Fatima's of Arab descent, and mine of African. So we kept our relationship hidden. Then, one night when I was 13, I sneaked into her room through the window, something I'd done a few times just for the thrill of it. We'd chat and share a few innocent kisses, nothing more. But that night, her father caught us mid-kiss. Furious, he threatened to call the police. I tried to bolt back out the window but ended up falling and breaking my arm. The whole neighborhood heard the commotion, and it turned into a huge scandal. Her father, who already despised me, wanted to press charges. Even though I was too young to face any real punishment, the whole ordeal was humiliating for my family. My dad decided it was best to send me to Africa for an indefinite time to keep us apart. Adjusting to my new life was tough, and Fatima had a hard time too, but we managed to keep in touch online. When I finally returned to France after finishing high school, it was like nothing had changed between us. We picked up where we left off, still dating in secret. By the time we were 20, we were both certain we wanted to spend our lives together. We thought we could make it work, but we were a bit naive about the hurdles ahead. When we broke the news to our families, they acted as though we'd announced the end of the world. They wanted us to marry within our own cultures, and tensions exploded. The entire neighborhood started buzzing with gossip, and everyone seemed to have something to say about our relationship. It was painful, to say the least. We tried to hang on for a year, and Fatima even suggested we move far from Paris to study together and leave our family's opinions behind. But my father was ill, so I stayed. When he eventually passed away, I was drained, with no strength left to fight. I decided to end things with Fatima, and she moved to another city. After that, we lost all contact. Tired of the constant whispers and gossip in the neighborhood, I moved to a student residence on my university's campus. That year was brutal. I'd visit my family on weekends, and it was at a wedding one day that I met Louise. Her family had just moved into the neighborhood, and we ended up seated at the same table. We spent the night laughing and swapping stories. I even told her about Fatima, while she shared her own story about her ex. Apparently, she'd broken up with him because he couldn't wait until marriage, and when she suggested he marry her, he wasn't ready, so she ended it. We were both carrying a lot of pain, and over time we became close friends, hanging out regularly. But I noticed Louise's mood would shift whenever I brought up Fatima, so I eventually stopped mentioning her. One day, Louise admitted she had feelings for me. I told her I still had feelings for Fatima, but she insisted that dating her would help me move on. So I agreed to give it a shot. At first, being with someone else felt strange, but I gradually got used to it and even started to develop real feelings for Louise. But over time, her jealousy over Fatima grew, despite me never mentioning her again after Louise confessed her feelings. It was odd the way Louise acted. Living on campus, I didn't hear much gossip from the neighborhood, but apparently, people were still talking about my past with Fatima. They were rehashing stories like the time I'd broken my arm trying to escape through her window and other moments from years ago. I did my best to reassure Louise that my past with Fatima was over, but it was never enough. She always found ways to compare herself to Fatima. Sure, Fatima was beautiful, That was a fact I couldn't change. But it was beyond my control. Louise blamed me, almost as if it was my fault I'd ever been with someone so attractive. Even though she'd never actually met Fatima in person. Maybe she'd seen a photo, who knows? I constantly told Louise she was the most beautiful woman in my eyes, that she was the one who mattered now. But it didn't seem to matter. The comparisons never stopped. Every time we tried something new together, she'd ask if I had done it with Fatima. What bothered her most was knowing I'd been intimate with Fatima. It was starting to feel unbearable. In spite of all this, I went ahead and proposed to Louise. She was from the same culture as me, which kept my family happy, and honestly, I didn't have the strength to fight for love all over again. We planned to marry in August, right after I'd finished my studies in July. Timing that seemed perfect. Everything seemed stable, aside from her insecurities, until 2 weeks ago, when I got a call from an unknown number. The man on the other end introduced himself as Louise's ex and told me they were still seeing each other. He even claimed they'd slept together multiple times. I didn't believe him at first. I thought it was some scheme to ruin our relationship. But then he sent me screenshots of their conversations. I brushed it off, saying those could be faked, but he invited me to meet him in person. I thought about warning Louise, but decided to see this guy first. I brought 2 friends along just in case it was a setup. When we met, he pulled out his phone and showed me Louise's number, their messages, and details that only someone close to her would know. They'd been carrying on for 2 months, and Louise had just ended things with him a week before he reached out to me. I called Louise and told her we needed to talk. Oddly, I didn't feel any anger, not even hurt. I felt like a detached spectator, watching my own life play out on a screen. A friend suggested I record our conversation, so I did. When I confronted Louise, she seemed stunned, denying everything and insisting the guy was out to ruin us. I showed her the screenshots and she repeated what I told him, that the messages could easily be fakes. I explained that I'd met him in person, and he'd shown me his phone with details he couldn't have known otherwise. That's when she broke down, started crying, and begged for forgiveness. It all went down at her house, in her room, and eventually her family came in to see what was going on. I tried to explain, but they didn't believe a word I said. I didn't bother arguing. I just walked out. They called my family before I even got home. I told my mother everything, but apparently, Louise had already spun a story, claiming she'd only done it because she thought I was sneaking around with Fatima. Turns out, Fatima had come back to town, though I hadn't heard about it. Now everyone was saying the affair was Fatima's fault, that Louise was the victim, while Fatima and I were painted as the villains. Angry and frustrated, I cut off contact with everyone. It's been about 10 days since I last spoke to anyone from my neighborhood. I've been crashing at a friend's place from school, keeping my location a secret. My phone's been off and I only keep in touch with my mother through email. Louise sends me a flood of emails too, but I delete them all unread. I have no idea what to do next. Everyone's asking me to forgive her, but I feel nothing but disgust toward her. I don't know how to move forward or how to handle this tangled mess. It's complicated. The timing of all this couldn't have been worse. My exams were right around the corner, and it was like I went numb, running on autopilot just to get through them. Nothing outside of finishing my degree mattered, and honestly, focusing on myself was the only thing I could handle. Now I'm officially an engineer. I've stayed in complete no contact with Louise, her family, my family, and anyone else who decided to meddle in my business. But as soon as I returned to my apartment after the last exam, the reality of it all hit me like a wave crashing down. I felt exhausted, utterly abandoned. I was so anxious about the flood of messages I'd find if I turned on my phone that I avoided it altogether. I just wanted to sleep. I'd read somewhere that most people haunted by thoughts of an ex with someone else have mental images of their partner with the affair partner. Oddly enough, my mind kept going back to memories of myself with Louise. The times we cuddled, kissed, and more. It made me feel filthy, like I couldn't escape the dirtiness of it. I scratched at myself without thinking and ended up taking a shower, trying to scrub off the feeling. I actually showered twice that night, and even then, lying in bed, I started scratching again, my skin crawling at the memories. So, I ended up sleeping on the floor. The next day, every time those images became too much, I'd start scratching and head for the shower again. I must have done that 8 times. Now, I've cut down to 3 or 4 times a day, but I worry about damaging my skin. Has anyone else felt this way? I hope it's not some sort of compulsion. The next day, I finally turned my phone on. Over 200 texts and countless voicemails flooded in. I didn't bother reading a single one. I just deleted them all. I didn't have the strength to read the same tired words, people telling me the same things over and over. I finally decided to go home, knowing it was time to face my family. It was a Saturday, so I was sure there'd be people there. I've never felt that level of stress in my life. When I got home, I was greeted by my uncle, my dad's brother, who declared himself head of the family after my father passed away. His wife, or as I call her, the witch, because, well, she is one, their kids, a few family friends, and my siblings. Oddly, my mother wasn't around. My uncle wasted no time, immediately yelling at me. I ignored him, but seeing my little sister run to hug me was a relief. God, I love that kid. All my siblings look up to me, and I felt a pang of guilt for not being there for them through all this. Usually, when I'm home, I help with their homework, tuck the youngest in, and tell them stories my father used to tell me. And when I'm away, we talk every night to catch up on their day. We're close like that, but my uncle just kept yelling, and eventually I had enough. There I was, sitting in front of everyone, feeling like I was on trial or something. The witch piped up, asking if I'd finally come to my senses. Apparently, Louise had changed her story. Now she was claiming she'd only kissed her affair partner, saying I pressured her into confessing something she never did. But I knew what I saw on that guy's phone. Honestly, I don't even know who Louise is anymore. She's turned out to be one of the most manipulative people I've ever met. How could someone hide such a nasty side for so long? Or maybe I'm the fool here, for not seeing it. She used to tell me that lying was a deal breaker for her and that she despised narcissistic types. Now it's clear she's become exactly what she claimed to hate. It's beyond anything I can wrap my head around. By then, I didn't care about convincing anyone. I told everyone what had happened and made it clear they could believe me. Someone they'd known all their lives, or they could believe Louise, who they'd known barely a year. The witch jumped in, saying it was impossible because Louise was such a sweet, caring girl who volunteers and helps the community. I told her that didn't mean anything. After all, even Hitler volunteered at some point. Then my uncle declared that if Louise had actually slept with her affair partner, I had the right to break things off. As if I needed anyone's permission to decide who I'd spend my life with. But as soon as the witch chimed in, saying it didn't matter if it was true because Louise's actions would just be a young person's mistake, my uncle did a complete 180 and agreed with her. He's the biggest pushover I know, never sticking to his own opinion if his wife says otherwise. I wouldn't even be surprised if he knew she was cheating on him. He's that terrified of her. She's quite a bit larger than he is. Seeing them walk together, you'd think it was a lady escorting her child. Then, the witch tried to pin it all on Fatima, saying I should just admit that this was all because of her. I kept my cool and told her I hadn't heard from Fatima in 2 years. My uncle, of course, followed up with, well, if it's not about Fatima, then forgiving Louise should be easy. At that point, I'd had it. I said, all right, I'll forgive Louise if you let me sleep with the witch for 2 months. That threw the room into chaos. My uncle tried to hit me, but family friends held him back. I called them all hypocrites, expecting me to forgive something they wouldn't dream of forgiving themselves. Then I made it clear. No one was allowed to interfere in my life anymore. The witch started crying, and my uncle, full of drama, declared I was dead to them. Honestly, at that moment, I couldn't have cared less. I went up to my room, the one I'd kept there all this time. I felt a slight pang of regret. They were still family, after all, but I couldn't let them dictate my life. For a moment, I began to doubt what Louise's affair partner had shown me, wondering if I could forgive her if it had just been a kiss. But it didn't take me long to realize there was no way. Never. When I was a kid, if my parents were running late to pick me up from school, a neighbor would watch me along with his own 2 kids. He was always so kind, treated me like one of his own, even gave me little candies and gifts. I really cared for him. He was respected by everyone. But one day, This gentleman took his own life after he found out his wife had been cheating on him. That's what cheating does. It destroys people. A year later, his wife packed up and moved to Canada with their kids and her affair partner. Maybe that's why I have such a deep-rooted hatred of cheating. So, no, I'm not going to break myself just to give Louise one more chance. Honestly, I don't even understand why everyone is trying so hard to get me back with her, or what they think they're gaining from it. When my mom returned, I could tell she'd already heard the commotion. She came into my room, and the first thing she did was hug me, asking about how I was feeling and how my finals had gone. She's always been such a kind-hearted person, showing love more through actions than words. I thought back to a few years ago when I used to work in fast food while studying. I'd come home around 2 a.m., and there she'd be, waiting for me, warming up dinner and chatting with me as I ate. We'd talk and laugh so much that we could barely keep from waking up the whole house. I filled her in on what had gone down with my uncle and his wife, and for the first time I shared the whole truth about Louise, why I had to end things. In my last post, I mentioned that I'd only told my mom that Louise cheated but hadn't told her the full extent. She, like everyone else, thought it was just a kiss. She felt for me, saying how sorry she was for everything I was dealing with, but what caught me off guard was seeing her cry. My mother, the strongest woman I know, who didn't even break down after my father passed, was in tears. She'd kept her grief private, crying alone at night so that we kids wouldn't see her pain. And here she was, crying over what I'd gone through. It broke me, and I couldn't hold back my own tears. She hugged me, and I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, hatred, all hitting me at once. She told me she'd stand by whatever decision I made. Once she went back downstairs, everyone else eventually left. I didn't bother asking what she'd told them. I didn't care. For the next week, I turned off my phone and spent the time sleeping, reconnecting with my siblings, gaming with them, and just trying to manage the pain. My mom got a lot of calls from Louise's parents, and she only brought it up when she felt I was in a good place to talk. Apparently, Louise was struggling. She'd even been in the hospital and was reportedly falling apart because I'd gone no contact. Her parents were practically begging my mom to convince me to meet with them, just once. Although my mom assured me I didn't have to, I agreed to meet with them, and with Louise next Saturday. Louise has been in control of the narrative this whole time, so I think it's my turn. I'm not sure if I should invite them to my place or go to theirs, but either way, I'll be ready. I even considered contacting Louise's affair partner, pretending that I could give her another chance and see if he would reveal more. So yesterday, I did just that. We set up a time to meet tomorrow, Sunday, and he said there was far more to the story than I knew. He wouldn't send me proof, worried I might show it to Louise, but he promised to tell me everything face to face. I'm prepared to hear it, whatever it is. Now about Fatima. Before I could reach out to apologize for her name being dragged into this mess, she actually emailed me first. And no, it's not what you might think, lol. She was furious and didn't understand why people were saying she'd messed up my relationship, but she still checked in to see if I was okay. I haven't responded yet because I honestly don't even know what to say. I feel like I'm in a fog, but I'll respond in between meeting with Louise's affair partner and her family. So yesterday, I met with Louise's affair partner, AP. I'm too drained to go into all the details, but here's the main story he told me. We met at the same place as before, and, of course, I recorded everything. Long story short, they dated for 4 years on and off. Apparently, Louise was never the virgin she claimed to be, and he wasn't the first man she'd been with either. Despite this, he was, and still is, crazy about her, even though she cheated on him twice. Both times, he was willing to forgive her and work through it. Then, things took a darker turn. Louise got pregnant but didn't know who the father was. Still, he was willing to raise the baby as his own and didn't even want to do a paternity test. Her parents found out about the pregnancy and insisted on an abortion. Under that pressure, she eventually miscarried. The whole situation led to her being severely depressed, and her family decided to move her somewhere new to start fresh. According to him, that's when Louise came up with the whole born-again virgin story, whatever that means. He said she saw the miscarriage as some sort of punishment for her past and decided to reinvent herself. She broke up with him, though they stayed friends. So far, he hasn't shown me any hard proof because he claims he changed his phone in the meantime. The guy showed me long exchanges he'd had with Louise throughout the time I've known her. In these messages, Louise talked about meeting me, describing it as her chance to experience the kind of old-fashioned, deep romance she always dreamed of. She spoke of how, over time, she thought I was a genuinely good guy, someone she could build something with. Apparently, every time she felt insecure about us, she'd turn to him for support. This means he practically knows every detail of our relationship, sharing specifics only Louise and I should know. He mentioned that at first, Louise didn't actually like me as a person. She was more attracted to the idea of someone capable of a fairy tale relationship like I had with Fatima. He believed that Louise still doesn't truly love me. Rather, she's obsessed with the idea of owning me entirely, an obsession born from her feeling that she never truly had me. I'm not sure if everything he told me from before we met is the truth, but all the details he shared about the time I've been with Louise match up. Each new revelation makes me angrier, a feeling I'm not used to, and I don't know how to deal with it. Right now, the last thing I want is to meet with Louise's family, but I keep wondering if they knew about her history all along. What I'm certain of is that I no longer want to see Louise. There's a huge part of me that wants to broadcast every piece of evidence to everyone we know because it feels so wrong that I, who grew up here, should have to bear the consequences of her lies. Yet, at the same time, I don't want to do that. I still have a lot of respect for Louise's parents, so maybe the best thing is to send the evidence to them privately, ask for their explanation, and then decide if I'll meet them. I feel like I'm losing my mind while plenty of people live for years with spouses who've cheated, even with kids involved. As for the meeting with Louise and her family, yes, I went through with it. We met at my house with my mom there as well. Beforehand, I'd sent a long audio message to Louise's parents, outlining everything I'd learned from her affair partner and telling them I was done with her playing the victim while casting me as the villain. I made it clear that our relationship was over, but if rumors kept circulating, I wouldn't hesitate to expose Louise to our social circle. I said I'd cancel the meeting unless she was willing to be honest. Almost immediately, Louise's mom called, saying that Louise had finally admitted everything, taken down her posts, and owned up to it all on social media. Since I don't use Snapchat or Instagram, I had a mutual friend verify, and it was true. Honestly, I was surprised. I thought she'd never do it, especially with how much traditional families like hers value appearances. Since she did, I went ahead with the meeting. I had braced myself for the worst, thinking that seeing her would bring back those memories and that compulsion to scratch. I feared it might be too overwhelming. But when she arrived, I barely recognized her. She looked like she'd lost weight in no time. She seemed so sad and defeated, never once making eye contact or saying a word to me. We all sat in the living room, making small talk until her mother started pleading with me to take her back. She said Louise's insecurities were the root of everything she'd done. But I'd come prepared with my questions and stayed focused. The first thing I asked was why Louise had lied about her past and pretended to be someone she wasn't. She started crying, her gaze fixed on the floor. Her mother stepped in, saying Louise had always felt judged for her past, and then asked me if, knowing the truth now, I would still have dated her. I told her that the what-ifs didn't matter anymore. They only led to imaginary scenarios. What mattered was the real choice Louise had made, to lie about her past. That was our only reality, the one that had brought us to this point. And in that reality, I had spent all this time in a relationship with someone who didn't exist, with a person I could never truly know or trust because I didn't know what was real and what was just another lie. Louise's parents kept defending her, trying to justify her actions, but she remained silent, not saying a word. The whole conversation just circled back to the same points. Eventually, sensing I wasn't budging, they made a surprising request. For the sake of whatever love I'd once had for their daughter, they asked me to postpone the wedding, take the summer, and reconsider. I wasn't expecting that, and honestly, I didn't know how to respond. My mother, who had been quiet through it all, noticed I was struggling to answer. She stepped in and calmly said that she and I had already discussed everything, and I had made my decision. Even if I changed my mind down the road, she would advise against it, but she'd still support me. She reminded them that this meeting wasn't about reconciliation but closure. She also mentioned how much this had affected me, including the scratching. For a moment, the room went silent. Then Louise asked to speak to me privately. She insisted it wasn't to change my mind but to accept my Scion if we could just have a one-on-one. I told her I wasn't comfortable being alone with her, so we settled on taking a walk outside. We walked for about half an hour, and it was the first time I saw her so vulnerable. For once, she took accountability for her actions and started by admitting that her past was far from what she had let on. She said she'd had a promiscuous history, not because of any trauma or hardship but maybe just because it was her nature. She'd grown up in a loving family and had started being sexually active at a young age. 12, she said. By 15, she'd had multiple partners at once, and by 18, she'd lost count after 40. She admitted she'd never known real love before me, only seeking validation through physical relationships. With her affair partner, AP, she'd found a man who loved her unconditionally, but she couldn't return that love fully. She was constantly seeking out other partners, trying to fill an emptiness that intimacy couldn't satisfy. Eventually, she became pregnant, and for the first time, she felt a genuine connection with her unborn child. But after her miscarriage, her family decided he needed a fresh start, so they moved. She broke things off with AP because she couldn't love him the way he deserved, though they stayed friends. Then she admitted that she'd actually known about me before we met, having heard about my relationship with Fatima. One time, she'd gone to the fast food place Fatima and I used to visit, where we were friends with the owner's son. He'd always taken photos of his regulars and put them up on the restaurant's walls. Among those photos were two with Fatima and me, one when we were 11 and another when we were 19. The 19-year-old picture held a bit of a legendary status in the neighborhood. It was my birthday, and Fatima had spent all summer working to give me a celebration I'd never forget. She bought me a tuxedo, dressed up in a beautiful evening dress, and rented a limo to pick me up from my house. She promised a magical night. But just 200 meters later, the limo stopped, in front of that same little fast food joint. Fatima had that kind of playful humor, and I was embarrassed showing up in a suit after a limo ride, only to eat kebabs. But it was perfect in its own way. She ordered our usual kebabs, bought a muffin, put a candle on it, and told me to blow it out. The owner snapped a picture of the moment and loved telling people about how Fatima had pranked me. That night turned into the best birthday I'd ever had. But that's another story. When Louise heard about our story, she became obsessed with the idea of that kind of love. When she eventually met me and realized I was the guy in the photo, she was immediately drawn to me. But, intimidated by the stories she'd heard, she felt the need to start lying about her past. When she realized she had actual feelings for me, it was too late to take those lies back. She knew the truth would drive me away. As we continued dating, she carried the weight of that guilt, and for the first time she experienced love without physical intimacy. She was afraid that if we crossed that line, she might lose her feelings as had happened with everyone else before. But over time, her lies made her feel unworthy of me, and that only fed her insecurities. She was terrified of losing me, but she couldn't stop hating herself for the deception. This self-loathing drove her to sabotage the relationship, pulling her back into old habits and cheating on me with AP. Her words were a lot to take in. Louise said she'd finally faced the reality of her actions when I found out the truth, and it completely shattered her. She confessed that she'd become someone she didn't recognize, a person capable of manipulating and trying to guilt me into staying. When she saw that nothing would work, she lost all hope, even spending time in the hospital after she fainted from the stress. She admitted that she didn't want to live anymore, not because she'd lost me, but because she was horrified by what she had become. She told me she wasn't trying to force me back into her life anymore. Even if I found a way to forgive her, she knew she'd never be able to forgive herself. She had started therapy, hoping to understand her behavior and uncover who she really was. She acknowledged it would be a long journey but asked if I could find some compassion in my heart to forgive her and maybe even help her grow. She said she'd be grateful forever. I almost agreed to stay in touch. Hearing her speak that way stirred something in me. I felt a strange empathy for her, which was hard to understand, especially after everything. But deep down, I knew my feelings for her were gone. I explained that I needed to separate myself from her to heal and that, in truth, she didn't need me for her own healing. She might feel she needed me, but facing herself alone was the only way she'd be able to grow. She said she had expected that answer but felt that if she didn't at least try, she'd regret it forever. She accepted my decision but added that she wouldn't give up on the hope of becoming a better person and believed we might reunite someday. I almost told her that I'd never be able to be with someone who had cheated on me, or anyone, but held back. Instead, I simply said I had moved on and that it wasn't fair to her if I gave her any hope. She didn't respond to that, and we ended up talking about lighter things. When her parents called to say they were home, I walked her back to her house. Before leaving, I told her I would be going no contact. It was the healthiest way for both of us to move forward. She agreed, though we both knew it would be hard, living in the same neighborhood where we'd inevitably run into each other now and then. She asked for one last hug, and we embraced. When I left, I felt lighter, like a weight had lifted. I wasn't angry anymore, and so far I still feel that way. As for Fatima, yes, I did meet her. Actually, I met her twice. I'm not sure if this is the best place to go into that, but maybe I'll do a final update before heading off on my summer vacation if anyone's interested in where things go from here. Since reuniting with Fatima, I've felt on the edge of some major life choices. Whatever path I choose now feels like it could change everything, and it's overwhelming. The first meeting, I knew Fatima was back in town, and I figured we'd cross paths eventually. It happened one day in a supermarket. I was with my siblings, and she was there with her mom. For background, I've always been close to Fatima's mom. I see her as a second mother since she helped raise me when I was young. We've stayed in touch, calling each other about once a month. Fatima also kept in touch with my mom. So, while our fathers were staunchly opposed to us being together, our mothers never had any issues with our relationship. Fatima's dad has always been deeply committed to preserving their culture, believing strongly in marrying within the same ethnicity as a way to keep their heritage alive. My dad was equally proud of his roots. At first, he wasn't entirely against Fatima and me, but after an incident where her father insulted me publicly for holding hands with her in the street, my dad felt differently. He told me that, as Black people, we had faced so much racism and humiliation, and trying to make others accept us felt like giving in to their prejudice, invalidating the struggles of those who fought for our rights. From that point, both sides of our families got involved, and our relationship no longer felt like it belonged to us. Despite all of this, Fatima always had her mom's support, just as I had mine. When we broke up, I told my mom not to keep me updated on Fatima's life because it hurt too much. Both our mothers respected that. I knew Fatima was still in touch with my mom, but I never minded. Their relationship was separate from my own pain. Seeing Fatima in the supermarket that day was surreal. She looked even more stunning than I remembered. It's hard to explain. After 2 years without a single glimpse, there we were, face to face. I couldn't think of what to say, so I turned to her mom, who I've always seen as a second mother. She smirked, this little traitor, and left us alone, saying, "You two have things to catch up on." She took my brothers with her, giving Fatima and me a few minutes to talk alone. I honestly can't remember most of what we said because I was so nervous I could hardly keep it together. In the end, it was nothing special, just enough to exchange numbers so we could reconnect later. The next day, I called her, and we made plans to meet at a restaurant 3 days later. But before then, we ended up talking for hours each day, catching up on the last 2 years. Fatima shared that she just graduated and would start a remote job in September, which would give her the freedom to work from anywhere. The flexible schedule also lets her pursue her longtime passion for manga. She's incredible at drawing and storytelling and has always wanted to create her own series but never had the confidence. Now, she's determined to make it happen but wanted the security of a degree and a steady job first. As she talked about her dreams, I was amazed by how much she'd grown in just 2 years. Then again, I wasn't really surprised. She's always known what she wants and how to go after it. Meanwhile, I felt like the failure of the neighborhood. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel people staring, judging me as the idiot who got played by Louise. It's like everyone could see my blind stupidity, and it haunted me. The second meeting, When Fatima and I met up for the second time, everything hit me. My feelings for her had never gone away. I love her. I always have, and I'm starting to believe I always will. This isn't some passing crush or nostalgia. It's the kind of love that's woven into my life. I've changed and grown since we were kids. My values, my principles, they've all evolved. But one thing has stayed constant. My love for her. I've missed everything about her. I missed our long talks, the way we could just be with each other, and the feeling of being with my best friend and the love of my life all in one. It only took seeing her twice and a few phone calls to make me realize that. It's ridiculous, honestly. I thought I had everything figured out with Louise, thought I knew myself and the life I was about to start. Now, I wonder what would have happened if I'd met Fatima under different circumstances. Would I have become the person I hate most, breaking Louise's heart, or even cheating on her if I'd realized all this too late? The thought terrifies me. It makes me question how solid my principles really are. I remember an old man once telling me that we're all deceivers at heart. Some of us know it, and others are just waiting for the right situation to find out. He said we're all ticking time bombs, ready to turn into everything we despise when the conditions are right. I brushed him off, thinking it was just a way for him to justify his own choices. But now I wonder if he was right. Could Fatima, the one person I thought was incapable of betrayal, ever end up in a situation where she'd do the unthinkable? It feels like a betrayal even to think it, given her integrity and character. But the doubt lingers, and I hate myself a little for it. When I asked Fatima if she dated anyone in the past 2 years, she told me she hadn't been with anyone. I struggled to believe her at first. She's beautiful, intelligent, confident, funny, and generous. It's hard to imagine someone like her not finding love or even just companionship. I told her she didn't have to spare my feelings. We weren't together, and I had no right to her personal life. She looked a little surprised, then smiled, saying that given what I'd been through, she understood why I'd feel that way, but that I'd need to work on trusting again, fast, before it poisoned my life. She suggested I take a break, get out of the neighborhood, and clear my mind. I told her I didn't want to go on vacation alone. My siblings were already planning to go to Senegal while I would have been on my honeymoon, but I couldn't imagine going with them. Senegal, for all its beauty, is a place filled with warmth, surrounded by people, and that's the last thing I needed. That's when Fatima offered to go on vacation with me, saying we had a lot to talk about. And without a second thought, I said yes. Sounds insane. 2 years of silence, and now we're planning a trip together. But it felt right. When I told my mom about the trip with Fatima, she had that concerned look, but not exactly for me. She just told me to be careful with Fatima's heart and to act with honor. No funny business before marriage, she said with a half smile, making her point. Fatima and I decided on one of the center parks in France, where we rented a cottage with 2 bedrooms. The place was incredible, surrounded by nature, old castles and farms, with plenty of activities to keep us busy. On our first night there, I wanted to bring up what had happened between us 2 years ago, the pain I caused her and how she'd managed afterward. But she told me the trip wasn't about her. She was there to be a support for me, not to dig up old wounds. She said I was already down for the count and didn't need any more weight on my shoulders just yet. But she promised we'd talk about it at the end of the trip. So, I decided to let it go and just enjoy being there with her, and it turned out to be one of the best vacations of my life. We laughed kids, played, and rode our bikes for miles each day. When either of us needed space, we'd either hang out alone or be together in silence, just like old times. It was as if those 2 years had never come between us. On the last day, right before we were due to head home, we finally had that talk. Fatima asked if I still wanted to have this conversation, warning me that it wasn't going to be easy. I assured her I was ready. In hindsight, I really wasn't. She started by pouring out how she felt when we broke up. She demanded to know how I could abandon her so easily after everything we'd built together, after the years we'd spent creating what she thought was an unbreakable bond. She was furious, shaking as she spoke, with tears streaming down her face. She reminded me of everything she had sacrificed for us, how she had stood against her own family, knowing in her heart that I was the one. She never doubted us, never wavered, and was ready to sacrifice whatever it took to build the life we had dreamed of together. She wanted to know how I could let go like that, just because things got hard. Her voice trembled with anger and grief, and she told me that after she left, she promised herself she'd never enter another relationship. If I could hurt her that way after everything we had, then anyone else could too. She threw herself into her studies and spent most of her time at the library, her only escape from the heartbreak. A year later, she learned I was with Louise. To her, after everything we'd been through, a single year wasn't enough time to move on. She told herself I couldn't be the person she thought she knew. And there she was, still a prisoner of her love for me, while there were plenty of men interested in her that she wouldn't even consider. She never looked for attention or validation from anyone else, but eventually, she thought something was wrong with her and that she needed to change. So she started seeing someone new. They went out a few times to dinner and a movie, and on their third date he tried to hold her hand. The moment his hand touched hers, she felt nauseous, like she might faint, and she barely held herself back from running out. Even though we'd broken up, even though I'd moved on with someone else, she couldn't bring herself to so much as hold another man's hand. That's when she realized she needed help and started seeing a therapist. She turned her focus to what she could control: her academic success, her career, and her life choices. But deep down, she admitted, she hated me, especially when she heard I was planning to get married. After her finals, she came back to reconnect with her family, people she hadn't seen in 2 years. She was barely on speaking terms with her father and decided I wasn't worth the battles she'd fought with him. When she heard about Louise's cheating, her first thought was that it was karma. But at the same time, she was genuinely worried for me, knowing how